The thermos of hot coffee felt warm in my hands, a small comfort against the cold November air. In the passenger seat, a plastic container held two of Diego's favorite beef empanadas, still radiating the heat of the oven. I had this sudden, spontaneous idea to surprise him. A little midnight picnic right outside his workplace. After 15 years, I thought it was about time I saw where my husband spent his nights. I turned the final corner onto Industrial Avenue, my smile fading as I stared through the windshield. My heart dropped. The massive complex of Industrial Dynamics was a ghost. It stood dark and silent against the moonlit sky, a skeleton of rusted metal and broken windows. Weeds choked the long-abandoned parking lot. The main gate was chained shut, a faded closed sign hanging crookedly from one hinge. This couldn't be right. There had to be a mistake. Maybe there was another entrance, a back gate for the night shift workers. I drove slowly toward the only sign of life, a dim, flickering light in a small security booth by the gate. An old man sat inside, his head bent over a newspaper. My hands trembled as I got out of the car, the container of food suddenly feeling foolish and heavy. I tapped gently on the glass. The guard, a man with a kind, wrinkled face, looked up, startled. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, sliding the window open a few inches. I'm looking for my husband," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "Diego Montero. He's the night shift supervisor here." The old man frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. He took off his reading glasses and looked at me, then at the derelict factory behind him. "Night shift, ma'am," he repeated slowly, his voice raspy with age. "This factory's been closed for 10 years. I just watch the place now. Make sure no one tries to steal the scrap metal." The world tilted on its axis. The thermos slipped from my numb fingers and crashed onto the asphalt, the sound echoing in the suffocating silence. 10 years. The words repeated in my mind, a merciless drumbeat against my skull. 10 years. The guard was saying something else, his face etched with concern. But I couldn't hear him. All I could hear was the lie. A lie so vast, so profound. It had swallowed 15 years of my life whole. My knees gave way, and the cold, hard ground rushed up to meet me. That was last night. Now, I sit by the kitchen window, watching the first rays of dawn paint the Texas sky in tender shades of pink. In my hands, I hold a cup of cold coffee I forgot to drink, lost in the wreckage of my memories. Today is my 42nd birthday, and my thoughts keep drifting back to a time when life seemed so simple, so predictable. 20 years ago, I was just another literature student at Texas State University. My world was built from the pages of books. I loved them more than people. Books never betrayed you. They never lied. They never broke your heart. In their ink and paper, I found the comfort and understanding so often missing in the real world. I was going to be a teacher, to share my love of stories with others. That was my plan. A quiet, orderly, predictable plan. Then Diego Montero walked into my life like a hurricane. He was a mechanical engineering student, all confident smiles and piercing brown eyes. Our paths crossed by pure chance in the university library. I was buried behind a stack of novels, and he was searching for a textbook on advanced calculus. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smooth and deep. "Could you tell me where to find the math section?" I looked up from my book and saw the most handsome man I had ever seen. "Second floor," I managed to say, trying to hide the sudden blush creeping up my neck. "Exact sciences." "Thanks." He didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the table, a charming grin playing on his lips. "What are you reading?" He gestured to the book in my hands. "Borges," I said, holding up the cover. "Labyrinths. Interesting," he said, though I could tell he had no idea who Borges was. "I'm more of a numbers guy, but I've always admired people who get art. Maybe you could explain it to me sometime." That was how it began. Our love story felt like something straight out of one of my novels. Diego was smart, ambitious, and utterly captivating. He told me about his dreams of becoming a successful engineer, of starting his own business, of providing a wonderful life for his future family. I was swept away by his confidence, by the certainty with which he spoke about the future. He made me feel seen, cherished. He brought me flowers, took me to the movies, and would listen for hours as I talked about poetry and prose. He seemed perfect. In our final year of university, he proposed. It happened right there in the library, the place where we first met. He got down on one knee between the shelves of classic literature and held out a simple, elegant ring. "Carla," he said, his eyes shining with sincerity, "you gave my life meaning. Marry me. We'll build a beautiful family, and I promise you'll never have to worry about a thing." I said yes without a second's hesitation. I believed a life of cloudless happiness awaited us. We were married right after graduation, a modest ceremony in a small chapel, with only our closest family and friends. My mother sewed my simple white dress, and Diego looked impossibly handsome in his dark suit. The first few years were everything I had dreamed of. He got a good job as an engineer at Industrial Dynamics, one of the biggest manufacturing plants in the city. I started teaching literature at the local high school. Our salaries were modest, but we had enough. We had love. We were happy. A year later, our daughter, Valeria, was born. The moment I held her, tiny and perfect, with dark hair and brown eyes just like her father's, I felt my universe shift. She became our center. Diego was a wonderful father. He would get up in the middle of the night to soothe her crying. He gave her baths. He spent hours on the floor playing with her. I would watch them together, my heart swelling with so much love I thought it might burst. I was the happiest woman in the world. Everything changed on our third wedding anniversary. Valeria was 3 years old. Diego came home from work one evening, his face glowing with excitement. "Carla, I have the most amazing news," he exclaimed, lifting me into his arms and spinning me around the kitchen. "I got a promotion." "Really?" I smiled, sharing his infectious joy. "Diego, that's wonderful. Tell me everything." "They've made me the head of the night shift," he announced proudly. "Can you believe it? My salary will almost double. We can finally start saving for our own house, for Valeria's college fund." "That's amazing," I said, hugging him tightly. But a small seed of unease began to sprout in my heart. "But why the night shift?" For a split second, a shadow crossed his face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He smiled reassuringly. "Well, that's just the nature of production. Honey, the factory runs around the clock, and the night shift is crucial. It's a huge responsibility, and the pay reflects that. My hours will be 8 in the evening to 8 in the morning." The seed of unease grew. That meant we would barely see each other. He would be sleeping all day while Valeria and I were awake. He would leave for work just as I was putting her to bed. "What about us?" I asked quietly. "What about family dinners?" He took my hands in his expression softening. "My love, it's only temporary," he said, his voice earnest and persuasive. "I'll work hard for a few years, prove myself, and then they'll move me to a daytime management position with even more responsibility. Think about our future. Think about Valeria. Don't you want our daughter to have the very best?" Of course, I did. What mother doesn't want the best for her child? I looked at his hopeful face, at the man I loved and trusted with all my heart. How could I stand in the way of his ambition, of our family's future? "So," I agreed. I pushed down the little voice in my heart that whispered something wasn't right. I smiled and told him how proud I was. And just like that, our new life began. A life built on a promise. A life, I now know, that was built on a lie. Diego was true to his word about the money. Within 6 months, we moved into a larger, rented house in a better neighborhood with a small yard for Valeria. A year after that, he bought a brand new sedan. Valeria was enrolled in a good private preschool, with ballet and piano lessons on the side. The price for this newfound prosperity, however, was my husband. I had, in effect, become a single mother. Our lives fell into a rigid, lonely routine. Diego would leave for his shift at 7 in the evening. Just as I was tucking Valeria into bed, he'd return at 8 the next morning, exhausted and smelling of stale coffee. Just as I was rushing to get Valeria to school and myself to work, our home during the day became a sanctuary of silence, a museum where the main exhibit, my husband, was sleeping and must not be disturbed. No loud television, no friends over for coffee, no happy noise of a child playing freely. "Please, Carla, keep it down," he would mumble from the bedroom. "You have no idea how stressful it is. I need my rest." Weekends were supposed to be our time, but even then, Diego was often drowsy and irritable, blaming his exhaustion on the demanding work week. Our conversations became superficial. We talked about bills, about Valeria's grades, about repairs needed around the house. Anything deeper was met with a wall of fatigue. I was so lonely. I missed the man I had married, the man who listened to my thoughts on literature, who held my hand and talked about our future. 15 years passed like that. 15 long, quiet years. I learned to live with the solitude. I poured all my energy into raising Valeria and into my students at school. I convinced myself that this was a normal sacrifice. He was working hard for us. I had to be supportive. I had to be understanding. Valeria blossomed into a beautiful, intelligent young woman. She was my light, my purpose. At 18, she was accepted into a prestigious pre-law program at a university in Austin. I was bursting with pride. But when she left, the house that had once felt quiet now felt cavernously empty. Now, when Diego left for his shift, I was completely and utterly alone. The silence was a physical presence, a weight that pressed down on me. I filled the hours with reading, grading papers, and watching old movies, anything to keep the loneliness at bay. From the outside, we looked like the perfect, successful family. Diego always brought home a good paycheck, often with bonuses. On our anniversaries, he would gift me expensive jewelry. For my birthdays, it was silk dresses or designer handbags. We took a family vacation to the beach every summer, but it was all a performance. The gifts felt like payments, transactions meant to keep me content and unquestioning. The vacations were strained, with Diego often seeming distracted, constantly checking his phone. Over the years, there were moments, little red flags that I chose to ignore. He started dressing better, trading his work jeans for tailored trousers and crisp shirts. He wore expensive cologne, a scent that seemed out of place for a factory supervisor. When I asked about it, he'd just smile. "A manager has to look respectable. Honey, I'm setting an example for my team." It made sense, so I let it go. Once, while doing laundry, I found a receipt from an upscale downtown restaurant in his jacket pocket. It was for a late dinner, dated for a night he was supposedly working. When I confronted him, his face clouded over with a look of deep hurt. It was a meeting with suppliers. "Carla," he said, his voice laced with disappointment. "They flew in from out of town. I had to take them out. Are you starting to suspect me? I work my fingers to the bone, day and night, for this family, and you interrogate me over a dinner receipt? That's not fair." I felt a hot flush of shame. He was right. How could I be so ungrateful, so suspicious? I apologized immediately, and I never asked questions like that again. I didn't want to be that woman's nagging, jealous wife. I chose to trust him. It was easier than confronting the terrifying alternative. Which brings me back to last night, the night the world I had so carefully constructed came crashing down. At my school, a parent-teacher conference had been scheduled for the evening. As the homeroom teacher, I had to be there. But at 6 o'clock, the principal called. The meeting was canceled. The vice principal, who was supposed to present the new curriculum, had come down with the flu. I hung up the phone and looked at the clock. It was only 6:30. Diego was in the kitchen, sipping his pre-work coffee. On a whim, a sudden, desperate urge to feel close to him, I made the suggestion, What if I come see you at work tonight? I said, a hopeful smile on my face. I could bring you a real dinner. Some hot coffee. We could have a little break together. Just for an hour. He nearly choked on his coffee. What? Why would you do that? His voice was strange, tight with an emotion I couldn't place. Just because, I said, my smile faltering a little. In all these years, I've never once seen your workplace. I just want to see where my husband spends all his time. Carla, that's impossible, he said quickly, shaking his head. The factory is a restricted facility. There are strict safety regulations. No outsiders are allowed on the floor. It's a liability issue. But I'm not an outsider. I'm your wife. It doesn't matter, he insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. Rules are rules. Even if you were the first lady, you couldn't get in without special clearance. I felt a familiar sting of disappointment, but I let it drop. I didn't want to start a fight. He finished his coffee, gave me a quick, perfunctory kiss on the cheek, and left. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence rushed back in. But the idea wouldn't leave me alone. A restlessness stirred inside me. I felt a need to do something, anything, to bridge the ever-widening gap between us. So, I went into the kitchen and started to cook. I made his favorite beef empanadas from scratch. I brewed a fresh pot of strong, dark coffee and poured it into a thermos. I told myself that even if I couldn't go inside, I could at least meet him at the gate. I could pass the food through to the guard. It would be a small gesture, a reminder that I was thinking of him. At 11 o'clock, I got in the car and drove toward the industrial park on the other side of town. The farther I drove, the more the gnawing feeling in my stomach grew. It was the same little voice that I had been silencing for years. But tonight, it was screaming. And then I saw it. The dark, skeletal remains of the factory. And I met Don Carlos, the old security guard with sad, kind eyes. He was the one who told me everything. Montero, you say, he had said, studying my face carefully after I had picked myself up off the ground. He had brought me into his small, warm booth and poured me a cup of his own coffee. I remember Diego. He worked here. Sure enough, a good engineer. Worked here right up until they shut the place down. But, where does he work now? I could barely form the words. Don Carlos hesitated, his gaze filled with a deep, paternal pity. He cleared his throat. Look, miss, he began, his voice gentle. I live over in the Los Palmos neighborhood. It's on the west side of the city. I see your husband there. Sometimes. With another family. I always just assumed you had divorced a long time ago. He wrote an address on a slip of paper from his notepad and pushed it across the table. Flora Street, number 15. His car is parked there most nights. Another family. The words didn't compute. They were just sounds, meaningless and alien. I thanked him, my voice a hollow echo of itself, and walked back to my car like a zombie. My mind was a blizzard of white noise. Los Palmos, Flora Street, number 15. It was an upscale condominium complex in a new part of the city I'd never been to. It was a world away from our modest house. I parked across the street, and there it was, Diego's dark blue sedan, the one he'd bought 2 years ago, the one he was still supposedly making payments on. I don't know what propelled me out of the car and into that building. It wasn't courage. It was a force beyond my control, a desperate need to see the truth with my own eyes. I found the apartment, number 3B. Through the door, I could hear the muffled sounds of life, music, laughter, a child's happy shriek, the sounds of a home. My hand, moving of its own accord, rose and pressed the doorbell. The door swung open. Diego stood there, dressed in a comfortable-looking sweater and jeans. He was smiling, a relaxed, happy smile I hadn't seen on his face in years. The smile vanished the instant he saw me. His face went white. Carla, he breathed, his eyes wide with panic. What are you doing here? He tried to block the doorway, to angle his body so I couldn't see inside. But it was too late. Over his shoulder, I saw her, a beautiful woman, younger than me, with long dark hair, and I saw them. 2 children, a boy of about 10 and a little girl, maybe 7. They were staring at me with wide, curious eyes. "Diego, who is it?" the woman asked, walking toward the door. He faltered, his gaze darting between her and me. This is. I found my voice. It came out cold and steady, a stranger's voice from a deep, frozen place inside me. "I'm his wife," I said, looking directly at the woman. His wife of 20 years. The moments that followed etched themselves into my memory like acid on glass. The young woman, whose name I would soon learn was Lucia, went pale. Her hand flew to her mouth as she sank onto a small bench in the hallway. "Diego," she whispered, her eyes locked on his, filled with a dawning horror. "You told me you were divorced." I was going to," he stammered, floundering, a man caught between 2 colliding worlds. He looked from her face to mine, a desperate, cornered animal. The children just stared. The boy, with his dark, serious eyes, instinctively moved closer to his mother. The little girl, with a pink bow in her hair, hid behind her father's legs, peeking out at me. "Daddy, what's happening?" the boy asked, his small voice cutting through the suffocating tension. "Daddy." The word was a physical blow. This child was calling my husband Daddy. My mind reeled, trying to process the impossible reality. While I was at home, keeping our daughter quiet so her exhausted father could sleep, he was here. He was being a father to these children. Lucia stood up, her composure surprisingly swift. She took each of her children by the hand. "Miguel, Sophia, go to your room now," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "The grown-ups need to talk." When the children had gone, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the entryway. My eyes scanned the apartment behind them. It was beautiful, expensive modern furniture, a huge flat-screen TV, gleaming hardwood floors. Family photographs adorned the walls. In one, Diego was hugging Lucia and the 2 children on a sunny beach, all of them beaming. They looked so happy, so real. "How long?" I asked, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. It was the only question I could form. "Carla, let me explain," Diego began, taking a step toward me. "How many years?" I repeated, my voice rising, sharper this time. It was Lucia who answered. Her gaze met mine, a silent understanding passing between used to a women betrayed by the same man. 15 years, she said quietly. "We've been together for 15 years. Miguel is 10. Sophia is 7. 15 years. The number echoed the guard's words. 15 years of my life. It meant that when our Valeria was only 3 years old, when he first took the night shift, this had already begun. While I was raising our daughter alone, believing I was making a sacrifice for our family's future, he was here, building another one. "You told me your wife died," Lucia said, her voice cracking with pain and anger as she turned to Diego. "You said she died in childbirth, and that you had a daughter from your first marriage who was being raised by her grandmother." And he told me he was working as a night shift supervisor at a factory. I added, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. The expensive gifts, the vacations, the constant fatigue. It all made sense now. "Where do you really work, Diego?" I asked, the question hanging in the air. Again, Lucia answered for him. "He's a co-owner of New Century Construction," she said, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I'm the chief accountant there. That's how we met. A construction company. A co-owner. He wasn't just getting by. He was wealthy. And for all these years, I had been diligently saving coupons, mending Valeria's old clothes, and feeling guilty for buying myself a new pair of shoes. The humiliation washed over me, hot and suffocating. "Carla, please." Diego tried again, his hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. I flinched back as if he were on fire. "Don't touch me," I hissed, Never touch me again. I turned and walked out of the apartment, out of that house of lies. The last thing I heard as the door closed behind me was Lucia's voice. Cold and final. Diego, I want you out. Now. I don't remember the drive home. I must have been on autopilot, my body performing the mechanical tasks of steering and braking while my mind was a vortex of chaos and pain. When I got back to my own house or house, sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where, just a few hours earlier, Diego had been drinking his coffee before leaving for a job that didn't exist. I sat there for hours, staring at the wall, as the lie unfurled in my mind, revealing its monstrous scale. 15 years of deception. He hadn't just cheated on me. He had built an entirely separate, secret life. At 6 in the morning, I heard the familiar sound of a key in the lock. Diego. He came in, looking haggard and defeated. He must have spent the night in his car. He walked cautiously into the kitchen, his shoulders slumped. Carla, he said softly, we need to talk. I just stared at him. It was like looking at a stranger. After 20 years of marriage, I didn't know this man at all. I can explain everything. He continued, his voice desperate. It's not what you think. And what do I think? Diego. My voice was eerily calm. I never meant to hurt you, he said. The classic, empty words of a liar. It happened. After the factory closed, I got the opportunity with the construction company. I met Lucia. She was alone, and won. I couldn't just leave her. You couldn't leave her. I repeated, the words tasting like poison. But you could leave me. You could leave me in a dark, empty house for 15 years. You don't understand. I was supporting the families. It was so hard on me. Hard on you? The calm finally broke. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Was it hard on you to live a double life while I was slowly dying of loneliness? Was it hard on you to play the happy father with your other children, while your own daughter barely saw you? He tried to embrace me, to use the physical closeness that had always been his way of ending an argument. This time, I pushed him away with all my might. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Carla, you're my wife. We can fix this. I'll end it with Lucia. I swear. I'm ready to end it all and come back to you. A bitter, broken laugh escaped my lips. Come back to me? There's nothing to come back to. This was never a marriage. It was a long-running play, and I was the only one who didn't know my lines. I love you, he whispered, his eyes welling with tears. I've only ever loved you. Love. I spat the word out. You call 15 years of lies love? You had children with another woman. Diego. Children. Get out. I screamed the last words. And don't ever come back. He left. For now. I knew he would be back. Lucia had thrown him out, so this house was the only place he had left to go. But in that moment, I was alone. And for the first time, the solitude didn't feel like a weight. It felt like air. I took the next 3 days off from school, calling in sick. I couldn't face my students, my colleagues. I couldn't pretend that my world hadn't just been shattered. During those 3 days, I became a detective in my own life. I searched the house, the garage, looking for clues, for anything that might help me understand the man I had married. In an old toolbox in the back of the garage, I found it, a second phone, a burner phone. Guessing the password was easy. Valeria's birthday. The phone was a treasure trove of his secret life. Photos of him with Lucia, Miguel, and Sophia on vacations I never knew they took. Text messages filled with terms of endearment and inside jokes. But there was more. There were business contacts, emails, and documents stored in the cloud. I discovered that New Century Construction wasn't just successful. It was a major player in the city's development. Diego wasn't just a co-owner. He was a founding partner. He was a millionaire. I found statements for bank accounts I never knew existed, deeds for properties registered under other people's names, and information on stock portfolios. The money he brought home to me, the supervisor's salary, was pocket change to him. It was just enough to keep me comfortable, to keep me from asking too many questions. On the third day, my hands shaking, I called Valeria. "Mom," she answered, her voice bright and cheerful. It instantly broke my heart. "What's up?" She sensed it immediately. "You sound weird. Did something happen?" "Valeria, honey," I began, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I need you to come home. There's something I have to tell you. Of course, I have a break in my classes this weekend. I can get a bus tomorrow morning." "Mom, you're scaring me." "What is it?" "I'll tell you everything when you get here," I promised, and hung up before I broke down completely. I didn't sleep at all that night. I paced the floors, rehearsing the words, trying to find a way to tell my daughter that the family she believed in was a fraud. How do you tell your child that her father has another family? That she has a brother and a sister she has never met? That the hero she has always looked up to is a liar and a cheat? Valeria arrived the next morning, looking so much like him it was a fresh stab to the heart. Tall and confident, with his dark hair and intelligent eyes. But she had my strength. I knew she did. She saw the state I was in the moment I met her at the bus station's weight I'd lost. The dark circles under my eyes. "Mom, what's going on?" she asked, her arms wrapping around me. "Where's Dad?" "Back at the house, over a cup of tea I couldn't drink." I told her everything. I laid out the facts calmly, clinically, trying to keep my own emotions in check. I told her about the factory, about Don Carlos, about Lucia, Miguel, and Sophia. I showed her the photos on the second phone. I watched as her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, then from shock to a cold, hard fury. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, her knuckles white as she gripped her mug. Finally, she looked at me, her eyes blazing. "He betrayed us," she said, her voice low and tight with rage. "He betrayed both of us. What are we going to do?" I asked weakly. I felt so lost, so powerless. Valeria's chin lifted, her expression resolute. "I know what I'm going to do," she said, standing up. "I'm going to his office, and I'm going to tell him exactly what I think of him." "Valeria, no, don't," I pleaded. I didn't want her to get hurt. "I have to." "Mom," she said, her voice unwavering, "someone has to hold him accountable. Someone has to make him look at what he's done." And with that, she grabbed her car keys and walked out the door, a warrior marching into battle. The New Century Construction office occupied the entire top floor of a gleaming glass skyscraper downtown. It was a world of hushed carpets, expensive art, and panoramic city views, a world I never knew existed. Valeria, fueled by a righteous fury, marched straight to the polished marble reception desk. "I'm here to see Diego Montero," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. The receptionist, a young woman with a flawless manicure, looked up from her computer. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Valeria said, her gaze unflinching. "I'm his daughter." The word daughter caused a flicker of surprise in the receptionist's eyes. She picked up her phone and murmured into the receiver. A minute later, Diego emerged from a set of double doors. He was wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. When he saw Valeria, a broad, practiced smile spread across his face. "Valeria, darling, what a surprise. What are you doing here?" "Shut up," she said, her voice loud enough to make heads turn across the open-plan office. "Don't you dare call me darling. Don't you dare pretend you're a loving father." Diego's smile vanished. His face paled as he glanced around at the curious stares of his employees. "Valeria, please," he hissed, grabbing her arm. "Not here. Let's go into my office and talk." "No," she said, yanking her arm away. "We'll talk right here. I want everyone to hear. I want everyone to know what kind of man you really are." She took a deep breath, and then she let him have it. Her voice, clear and strong, carried through the silent office. "For 15 years, you lied to my mother. You lived a double life while she sat at home, alone, waiting for you. You have a whole other family. A son and a daughter that I never knew about. You didn't just cheat on her. You erased us." Diego stood frozen, his face a mask of horror. His colleagues were now openly staring, some whispering to each other, others surreptitiously pulling out their phones to record the scene. "You stole my mother's youth," Valeria continued, her words like daggers. "You stole my childhood. I grew up in a quiet house, tiptoeing around so I wouldn't wake up my poor, tired father who was working so hard for us. What a joke. You weren't tired from work. You were tired from juggling your two separate lives. Valeria, you don't understand," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Oh, I understand more than you think," she shot back. "I understand that I never really had a father. I had a financial provider, a ghost who came home in the morning to sleep. And now I find out that all this time, you were being a real father to other children." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "I want to meet them. I want to meet my brother and sister. I want to see their faces and tell them exactly who their father is." "No," Diego said quickly, a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. "You can't. They're just children. They mustn't know. They mustn't know the truth about their own father." Valeria laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I guess the truth is so ugly, it has to be hidden. Well, you can't hide anymore." She turned on her heel and walked toward the elevator, her back straight and proud. Just before the doors slid open, she looked back at him over her shoulder. "By the way," she called out, her voice ringing with finality, "Mom is filing for divorce. Get a good lawyer. You're going to need one." The confrontation at his office was a turning point. It was the moment I realized we couldn't just let this go. Valeria's courage gave me strength. That same afternoon, I found a lawyer. Marta Sterling was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a reputation for being a shark in the courtroom. She specialized in high-asset, contentious divorces. I sat in her elegant office and told her the whole sordid story, from the night shift to the second family to the construction empire. When I finished, she leaned back in her leather chair, her expression grim. "Mrs. Montero," she said, her voice calm and measured, "your case is complicated, but not hopeless. The main problem, as I see it, is that your husband has had 15 years to prepare for this. I can almost guarantee that none of his major assets are in his name." She was right. A preliminary search conducted by her firm revealed the tangled web Diego had woven. The house we lived in, the house I had cared for 2 decades, was legally in his mother's name, Rosa Montero. The business was registered to a holding company with anonymous partners. The bank accounts with the most money were in Lucia's name. On paper, Diego Montero was just a mid-level manager at New Century Construction, earning a modest salary. "But we can fight this," Marta assured me, seeing the look of despair on my face. "This is called fraudulent conveyance. It's a clear attempt to hide marital assets. We have the evidence of his lifestyle cars, the vacations, the gifts. We have your daughter's testimony. We will subpoena his financial records, and we will prove he has been deceiving not only you, but also the IRS. It will be a long, ugly fight, Carla, but we can win." I felt a surge of determination. "I want to fight," I said. "He's not getting away with this." The moment I officially filed for divorce, the war began. The first salvo came from his mother. Dowa Rosa called me, her voice shrill with fury. "How dare you?" she shrieked down the line. "How dare you try to destroy my son, after everything he's done for you? He worked day and night to give you and that ungrateful daughter of yours a good life, and this is how you repay him." "Dowa Rosa," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "Your son lived a double life for 15 years. He has 2 other children. Lies. It's all lies. Slander from a jealous woman." She screamed. "And don't you forget, that house you're living in is mine. I can have you thrown out on the street tomorrow. Try it," I said, and I hung up the phone. The very next day, an official eviction notice was taped to my front door. I expected Lucia to be my enemy in this fight. After all, she was the other woman, the one who had shared the life that should have been mine. I was wrong. About a week after Valeria's visit to the office, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Mrs. Montero?" a hesitant voice asked. "This is Lucia Vega." I was wondering, could we meet? We met in a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop halfway between her side of town and mine. She looked tired and stressed, the beautiful, confident woman I had seen in Diego's doorway now looking fragile and heartbroken. "After you left that night, I started doing my own digging," she began, getting straight to the point. She slid a manila folder across the table toward me. "Diego wasn't just living a double life. It's much, much worse than that." I opened the folder. Inside were copies of documents, emails, and financial statements. My hands trembled as I read them. "He has two other women," Lucia said, her voice flat, "that I know of. One is his personal assistant, Paula. The other is a wealthy widow, Carmen, one of the company's investors. He promised Paula he would marry her as soon as he divorced me. He told Carmen he was single." I felt sick. It wasn't just to families. It was for women. At least, he had built a whole harem, a portfolio of women he managed like assets. "And that's not all," Lucia continued, her voice dropping lower. "As chief accountant, I have access to everything. For the past year, he's been systematically funneling money out of the company. He's moving it into offshore accounts under a false name. He's preparing to disappear." "What do you mean? Disappear?" "I mean run," she said, her eyes dark. "He's planning to sell his hidden stake in the business, liquidate everything, and leave the country." I found an application for a second passport and documents for a long-term property lease in Costa Rica. My mind couldn't grasp it. He was planning on abandoning everyone. Me, Lucia, all of his children, Valeria, Miguel, Sophia. He was going to take the money and just vanish. I looked at Lucia, at this woman I was supposed to hate, and all I saw was a reflection of my own pain, my own betrayal. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because he destroyed my life, too," she said, her fists clenching on the table. "I spent 15 years loving a man who didn't exist. My children adore a father who was planning to abandon them without a second thought." She looked me straight in the eye. "I want him to pay for everything." "What are you suggesting?" "That we join forces," she said. "I have the financial documents. You have the legal rights of a wife. My brother is a forensic accountant with the DA's office. Together, we can expose him for the fraud he is." I looked at the folder of evidence. I looked at her determined, tear-streaked face. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel alone. I felt a flicker of hope, a spark of rage turning into a fire of resolve. I extended my hand across the table. She took it, her grip firm. "Allies," I said. "Allies." She agreed. A bitter smile touched her lips. "He has no idea what's coming for him." For the next 2 months, Lucia and I operated like a covert intelligence agency. Our lives, once parallel and secret from one another, were now intricately intertwined by a single mission: to dismantle Diego Montero's empire of lies. Lucia became my inside source, a quiet revolutionary working from within the enemy's camp. Late at night, after her children were asleep, she would painstakingly copy financial records, download incriminating emails, and trace the labyrinthine flow of money into offshore accounts. She would deliver the evidence to me in discreet brown envelopes, meeting me in quiet library parking lots or the back aisles of grocery stores. My role was to assemble the arsenal. I spent my days with Marta Sterling and her team, piecing together the evidence Lucia provided. We meticulously documented Diego's lavish lifestyle, creating a stark contrast to the modest income he claimed on his tax returns. We found receipts for luxury cars I never knew he owned, travel itineraries for romantic getaways with his other women, and statements for credit cards that paid for a life of opulence Marta also brought in a private investigator who uncovered even more of Diego's duplicity, confirming the affairs with Paula, his assistant, and Carmen, the wealthy investor, our most powerful ally. However, turned out to be Lucia's older brother, Ricardo. As a forensic accountant for the district attorney's office, he was an expert at untangling the most complex financial crimes. When Lucia told him her story, his brotherly concern quickly turned into professional outrage. "This is more than just infidelity," he said grimly, spreading Lucia's documents across his dining room table one evening. "What I'm seeing here is a pattern of systemic fraud, tax evasion, asset concealment, money laundering. This isn't just a divorce case anymore. This is a criminal investigation." With Ricardo's involvement, the stakes were raised exponentially. He initiated an official inquiry, and suddenly, Diego wasn't just fighting his scorned wives. He was fighting the state. For the first time in 15 years, I felt a sense of purpose. I was no longer a passive victim of my husband's choices. I was an active participant in the fight for justice. The loneliness that had been my constant companion for so long was replaced by a sense of solidarity with Lucia, a woman I had once thought of as my rival. We were bound together by a shared betrayal, and in that, we found a strange and powerful strength. Valeria, too, became an essential part of our small army. After the initial shock and rage, her focus shifted. She became fiercely protective of me, but also of the half-siblings she had never known. She insisted on meeting Miguel and Sofia. The first meeting was painfully awkward. We met at a park, a neutral ground filled with the laughter of other families. The children were wary, confused. They couldn't understand why their father no longer lived with them, why their mother cried so much, or who this strange young woman was who claimed to be their sister. Daddy told us he didn't have any other kids. 10-year-old Miguel said, his arms crossed defensively over his chest. He had his father's stubborn chin. "He said it was just us," added 7-year-old Sofia, her voice a small, sad whisper. She clung to Lucia's hand. Valeria's heart broke for them. She sat on the edge of the sandbox, her voice gentle and patient. She didn't vilify their father. Instead, she talked about her own experience, about feeling like her dad was always away, always tired. She found a common ground in their shared sense of his absence. "It's not your fault," she told them, over and over again. "None of this is your fault." Slowly, tentatively, a bond began to form. Valeria started visiting them regularly, helping Miguel with his math homework and reading bedtime stories to Sofia. She became the big sister they never had, a stable, loving presence in the chaos their father had created. Meanwhile, Diego was not going down without a fight. When he realized Lucia and I had joined forces against him, he went on the offensive. First, he tried to appeal to my emotions. He showed up at the house one evening, a bouquet of expensive roses in his hand, his eyes filled with what looked like remorse. "Carla," he pleaded. Standing on the doorstep, I refused to let him cross. "I admit it. I made a terrible mistake. But don't 20 years of marriage mean anything to you? Can you really just throw all of that away?" "What 20 years, Diego?" I asked, my voice cold. "The 5 years of truth or the 15 years of lies? There's nothing left to throw away. You already destroyed it all. I'm ready to change. I'll cut off all contact with everyone else. It will just be you and me. We can start over." "It's too late," I said, and for the first time, I knew it was the absolute truth. The love I once had for him was dead, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I closed the door in his face. When pleading failed, he turned to threats. His lawyer sent menacing letters, reminding me that the house was in his mother's name and that, legally, I was entitled to nothing. "You'll be left with a teacher's salary and a rented apartment," he told me during a tense phone call. "Is that really what you want?" "I would rather have honest poverty than a life built on your dirty money," I replied, and hung up. His next move was to try and turn Valeria against me. He ambushed her outside one of her classes at the university. trying to play the part of the misunderstood father. Your mother has lost her mind, he told her, his voice dripping with false concern. She's on a crusade to destroy me, to destroy our family, all because of a moment of weakness. A moment of weakness? Valeria looked at him with pure contempt. You call 15 years, 2 children, and multiple affairs a moment of weakness? That's not a moment, Dad. That's a career. I worked hard. I provided for you. You had everything you ever wanted. I wanted a father. She shot back. And you weren't one. You were too busy providing for your other families. You lied to everyone. To Mom. To Lucia. To me. And to your other children. You are a stranger to me. Valeria, I'm your father, he said, his voice cracking. Do you really want to see me go to prison? Her answer was chillingly calm. If you committed crimes, then yes. You stopped being my father the day you decided one family wasn't enough. That was the day he lost her for good. He finally understood that he couldn't manipulate his way back into our lives. 3 months after I filed for divorce, the DA's office officially opened a criminal case against Diego. Ricardo and his team had found overwhelming evidence of his financial crimes. New Century Construction was raided, its records seized. Diego's business partners, seeing the writing on the wall, immediately moved to oust him from the company to save their own skins. His bank accounts were frozen. The properties he had hidden under other people's names were seized as part of the investigation. In the span of a few weeks, Diego went from being a wealthy, powerful businessman to a man with no money, no job, and no home. The story exploded in the local media. The tale of the construction mogul with a secret second family was too juicy to ignore. Journalists camped outside my house, outside Lucia's apartment, and outside his mother's home. His picture was splashed across the front page of the local paper, often alongside photos of me and Lucia, dubbing us the Wives Alliance. Paula, the assistant, gave a tearful interview on television, detailing how Diego had promised to marry her. Carmen, the investor, filed her own lawsuit against him for fraud, claiming he had convinced her to invest $500,000 in a shell corporation. Diego's carefully constructed world was not just collapsing, it was being publicly demolished. Brick by brick, he tried to defend himself in a disastrous television interview, attempting to portray himself as the victim. I just wanted to make everyone happy, he claimed, his expression one of profound self-pity. Is that such a crime? The public backlash was swift and brutal. Online, he became a meme, a caricature of male ego and deceit. His name became a local punchline for infidelity. The man who wanted to make everyone happy had ended up making everyone miserable. Most of all, himself. The scandal ripped through our extended families like a shockwave, leaving a trail of broken relationships and bitter divisions in its wake. Diego's mother, Dora Rosa, became his most vocal and deluded defender. She refused to accept any version of events that painted her son as anything less than a saint. To her, I was the vindictive shrew, Lucia was the homewrecker, and the other women were opportunistic liars. My son is a good man, a provider, she told any reporter who would stick a microphone in her face. These women, they seduced him, they trapped him, and now they want to take everything from him. The day I went back to the house to retrieve the last of my personal belongings was the final, ugly confrontation between us. Dora Rosa stood in the doorway like a guard dog, her face contorted with rage. You've ruined him, she spat, her voice trembling. For 20 years, he gave you a beautiful life, and you repay him with this public humiliation. You should be ashamed. I stood on the porch of the home where I had raised my daughter, where I had spent 15 years waiting for a man who was never truly there, and I felt a profound sense of pity for her. Dora Rosa, I said, my voice calm and steady. Your son deceived me for 15 years. He has a whole other family. These are facts. Lies. All lies. She insisted, her eyes wild. She was living in a fortress of denial, and the truth could not penetrate its walls. Her son, her perfect son, was the victim, It was the only story she could live with. My own father, Don Eduardo, a retired Army colonel who lived and breathed by a strict code of honor, was my rock. When he learned the full extent of Diego's betrayal, his quiet disappointment simmered into a cold fury. He drove down from his home in San Antonio to support me. One afternoon, he encountered Diego, who had come to the house under the pretense of collecting some mail. The confrontation was explosive. "How dare you?" my father roared, his voice booming with the authority of a man who had commanded troops. He grabbed Diego by the collar of his expensive shirt. "How dare you treat my daughter this way? For 20 years, she was a faithful, loving wife to you, and you treated her like a fool. Don Eduardo, you don't understand the situation." Diego stammered, trying to pry my father's iron grip from his collar. "I understand everything," my father thundered, his face inches from Diego's. "I understand that you have no honor. You are a liar and a scoundrel. If I were 20 years younger, I would teach you a lesson about what it means to be a man." I had to rush outside and physically pull my 70-year-old father off my 45-year-old husband. It was a surreal, pathetic scene that perfectly encapsulated the wreckage Diego had made of our lives. The true victims in all of this, however, were the children. Lucia's children, Miguel and Sofia, were struggling to cope with the sudden implosion of their world. Miguel, once a happy, outgoing boy, became sullen and aggressive at school. He started getting into fights, and his grades plummeted. Sofia, a bubbly, cheerful little girl, retreated into herself. She barely spoke, picked at her food, and woke up screaming from nightmares. Lucia had to start taking them to a child psychologist. "They don't understand why their daddy left," Lucia told me during one of our now frequent phone calls, her voice thick with tears. "They think it's their fault. They think they did something wrong to make him go away." Valeria became their lifeline. She spent every weekend with them, taking them to the movies, helping them with their school projects, just being there. She became the constant, stable presence they so desperately needed. She tried to explain the situation in a way their young minds could grasp, focusing not on blame, but on the fact that their father had made mistakes that only grown-ups could understand. "He loves you," she would tell them, even though the words tasted like ash in her mouth. "But he's not well right now, and it is never, ever your fault." The legal battle dragged on for nearly a year. It was a grueling, soul-crushing process. Diego and his lawyer used every dirty trick in the book. They tried to portray me as a bitter, money-hungry woman and Lucia as an unstable accomplice. They argued that Diego was a victim of his own success and generosity, a man who simply couldn't say no. One of the lowest moments came during the family court proceedings. To delay and inflict more pain, Diego demanded a DNA test for Miguel and Sofia, officially questioning their paternity in a court of law. Lucia was incandescent with rage. "How could you?" she screamed at him across the courtroom. "How could you do that to your own children? You were there in the delivery room when Sofia was born. You chose Miguel's name yourself. I just want to be sure." Diego replied coldly, refusing to meet her eyes. The tests, of course, confirmed he was their father, but the act itself was unforgivable. It was a public disavowal of his own children, a strategic move in a legal game, and it severed the last, frayed thread of their affection for him. From that day on, Miguel and Sofia refused to speak to him or even say his name. During the discovery phase of the criminal trial, Ricardo's team uncovered the full extent of Diego's escape plan. He had a new passport under his cousin's name, a beachfront house leased in Costa Rica, and nearly $2 million already transferred to untraceable offshore accounts. This was not an escape, his lawyer argued weakly in court. It was simply proactive international business planning. No one in the courtroom believed him. The divorce settlement and the criminal sentencing happened in the same week. It was the final, climactic chapter of our long nightmare. In the divorce case, Marta Sterling brilliantly argued that the house, despite being in Doe Rose's name, was marital property. We had lived there for 20 years. and marital funds had paid the mortgage and upkeep. The judge agreed. The house was awarded to me. The court also pierced through the veil of his shell corporations, awarding me a significant portion of his hidden business assets and a generous alimony package. Based on his true income, Doa Rosa was forced to move in with a relative, still cursing my name. The criminal sentence was the final nail in his coffin. The judge made an example of him. He was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud and tax evasion. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison, though the sentence was suspended, and 5 years of probation. He was ordered to pay back all the taxes he had evaded, with hefty fines and penalties. He was also ordered to pay child support for all 3 of his children until they reached adulthood. When the final gavel fell, Diego Montero had lost everything: his business, his money, his homes, his reputation. But his greatest loss was one that no court could quantify. He had lost his children, all of them. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. One of them pushed a microphone toward Valeria. "Valeria, do you have anything to say to your father?" She looked straight into the camera, her expression calm and composed. "I don't have a father," she said, her voice clear and steady. "A father is someone who loves you, who protects you, who is there for you. The man on trial today was just a source of money, and now that's gone, too." As we walked away from the courthouse, leaving Diego to face the pack of journalists alone, I felt a profound sense of release. It wasn't the victory of winning the money or the house. It was the victory of surviving. The truth, in all its brutal, agonizing glory, had finally set me free. The long, dark night was over, and for the first time in 15 years, I could see the dawn. After the trial, the silence in my house felt different. It was no longer the oppressive, lonely silence of waiting. It was a peaceful, expansive silence of my own making. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly free. Free from the lies, free from the suffocating pretense of a happy marriage, free from the endless, draining task of supporting a man who wasn't really there. But freedom, I soon discovered, came with its own set of challenges. The trauma of the past year, of the past 15 years, had left deep, invisible wounds. I would find myself waking up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding with a nameless anxiety. I was suspicious of everyone. A kind word from a stranger felt like a manipulation. A friendly gesture seemed to hide an ulterior motive. Diego's betrayal had shattered my ability to trust, not just in others, but in my own judgment. How could I have been so blind for so long? The question haunted me. Valeria, ever my perceptive daughter, saw my struggle. "Mom, you need to talk to someone," she urged gently one afternoon. "You can't carry all of this by yourself." She was right. I started seeing a therapist, a kind, wise woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, in the safety of her quiet office. I finally allowed myself to grieve. I grieved for the young, naive woman I had been. I grieved for the marriage I thought I had. And I grieved for the years I had lost, living a half-life while my husband lived a full one elsewhere. "You are not to blame for his choices, Carla," Dr. Sharma told me in one of our sessions. Her words were a balm to my raw, wounded soul. "You were a faithful, trusting wife. You did everything you were supposed to do. The fault lies entirely with him and his decision to live a life of deceit." Slowly, painstakingly, I began to heal. I learned to forgive myself for not seeing the signs. I was not a fool. I was a woman in love who chose to believe in the man she had married. Therapy helped me reclaim my own narrative. This was not a story about my failure. It was a story about my survival. And I started to write. I had always encouraged my students to find their voice through literature, to process their world through words. Now, I took my own advice. I started writing down my story, not for publication, but for myself. I wrote about the happy early years, the creeping loneliness of the night shift, the shock of discovery, the pain of betrayal, and the long, hard fight for justice. The act of writing was cathartic. It allowed me to take the chaotic, painful emotions swirling inside me, and give them form, order, and meaning. As I began to rebuild my emotional world, Lucia was rebuilding her own. She and the children moved in with her parents, who provided a loving, stable environment. She found a new job as the head of accounting for a large retail corporation. She was thriving professionally, freed from the toxic environment of Diego's company. "I feel like I can finally breathe," she told me over coffee one day. We had maintained our strange, unlikely friendship for years. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, always afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. Now, I'm just me. The children, too, were slowly healing. The psychologist, along with the unwavering support of Lucia and Valeria, was helping them understand that their father's actions were a reflection of his own problems, not theirs. Miguel's anger began to subside, replaced by a quiet determination in his schoolwork. Sophia started to laugh again, her bright, bubbly personality re-emerging from the shadows. About a year after the divorce, I found an unexpected new purpose. My high school was facing budget cuts, and one of the first programs on the chopping block was advanced literature and college prep for underprivileged students. I couldn't let that happen. Using some of the money from my settlement, I decided to start my own program. I rented a small space in a community center and began offering free after-school courses in literature and essay writing for university entrance exams. Teaching had always been my passion, and now I could dedicate myself to it on my own terms. It felt wonderful to be building something new, something that was entirely mine. It was through this program that I met Antonio. He was a history professor at the local university, a widower who had lost his wife to cancer 5 years earlier. He was volunteering at the community center, tutoring students in history. He was the complete opposite of Diego in every way. He was quiet, gentle, and had a calm, steady presence that was incredibly soothing. There were no grand gestures, no charming lies. He was just, honest. Our relationship developed slowly, cautiously. I was terrified of being hurt again. And Antonio, with his patient, understanding heart, never pushed. He seemed to sense the invisible walls I had built around myself and was content to simply sit with me in the quiet garden I had created. "I'm in no hurry," he told me one evening as we were packing up after our classes. "We have all the time in the world. The most important thing is that you feel safe." He was the first man since Diego who had made me feel truly seen, not as a prize to be won or a role to be played, but as myself. For the first time in a very long time, I felt a flicker of hope that perhaps my story wasn't over. Perhaps there was a new chapter waiting to be written. Valeria, meanwhile, was excelling in law school. The ordeal with her father had ignited a fire in her. She became passionate about family law and women's rights. She volunteered at a legal aid clinic, helping women who were victims of domestic and financial abuse. "What happened to our family was a nightmare, Mom," she told me during a visit home. "But if I can use that experience to help even one other woman avoid what you went through, then it won't have been for nothing." She maintained her close bond with Miguel and Sophia. She was their fierce protector, their trusted confidant, their big sister in every sense of the word. She was the bridge between our two shattered families, a living testament to the fact that love and connection could grow even in the most broken ground. One afternoon, I received a call from a local publisher. A friend of mine, without my knowledge, had sent her the manuscript I had been writing. They wanted to publish it. My personal journal, my private catharsis, was about to become a public story. I was terrified, but also strangely exhilarated. Dr. Sharma had told me that sharing my story could be the final step in my healing. Maybe she was right. 2 years after the divorce, my life was unrecognizable. I was running a successful educational program. I was in a loving, healthy relationship with Antonio, and I was about to become a published author. I had taken the rubble of the life Diego had destroyed and built something new, something stronger and more beautiful, on my own foundation. Lucia, too, had found happiness. She had reconnected with an old friend from college, Jorge, a kind, decent man who knew her whole story and adored her and the children. They were getting married. She invited me and Antonio to the wedding. Seeing her walk down the aisle, radiant and happy, with Miguel and Sofia as her ring bearer and flower girl, was a profoundly healing moment. We had both survived. We had both found our way back to the light. 5 years. It had been 5 years since that cold November night, when my world had shattered on the broken asphalt outside a derelict factory. So much had changed. My life today was a universe away from the quiet, lonely existence I had once accepted as my fate. Antonio and I were married. We had a small, intimate ceremony in the backyard of the house. Valeria was my maid of honor, looking stunning in a simple blue dress. Miguel and Sofia, holding hands, stood beside Antonio as his witnesses. Lucia and her husband, Jorge, were there, their faces beaming. My father walked me down the aisle, his eyes shining with a pride that brought tears to my own. It wasn't a wedding born of youthful, naive passion, but of a mature, quiet love built on a foundation of honesty, respect, and shared healing. My book, which I titled The Night Shift, became an unexpected success. It resonated with thousands of women across the country who saw their own stories reflected in mine. I received letters and emails every day from women who had been trapped in similar webs of deceit, thanking me for giving them the courage to seek the truth and fight for their own lives. I started speaking at women's shelters and support groups, not as a victim, but as a survivor. My greatest pain had become my greatest purpose. Valeria graduated from law school at the top of her class. She accepted a prestigious position with an international human rights organization, specializing in the protection of women in conflict zones. She was doing exactly what she had set out to do, fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. She was a force of nature, a brilliant, compassionate woman who had forged her own trauma into a weapon for good. She eventually married a wonderful man, a fellow lawyer she met through her work, and they were building a life of shared purpose. Lucia was happier than I had ever seen her. She was now the chief financial officer of her company, a respected and powerful executive. Jorge was a wonderful husband and a loving stepfather to Miguel and Sofia. He had officially adopted them, giving them the stability and unconditional love their biological father never could. Miguel, now a thoughtful and serious teenager, was at the top of his class, with dreams of becoming a human rights lawyer, just like his big sister, Valeria. Sofia had discovered a passion for music and was a gifted pianist, her melodies filling their happy home with a beauty that had once been silenced. And Diego? His story was a quiet tragedy of his own making. After his probation ended, he drifted. He tried to start a new business, but his reputation preceded him. No one would trust him. No one would invest in him. He worked a series of unsatisfying sales jobs, living in a small, rented apartment on the edge of town. He looked older than his years. The charming confidence he once wore like a tailored suit now replaced by a permanent air of defeat. He made several clumsy, half-hearted attempts to reconnect with his children over the years. He would send birthday cards with cash tucked inside, or leave awkward voicemails on their phones. They never responded. The damage he had done was too deep, the betrayal too absolute. He had questioned their very existence for a strategic advantage in court, and that was a wound that could never be healed. He had chosen his lies over his children, and in the end, he was left with nothing but the consequences of that choice. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he would sometimes tell people at bars that he had lost everything in a bitter divorce, that his ex-wives had taken him for all he was worth. He was still the hero of his own tragic story, a man who could not, or would not, ever face the truth. One warm summer evening, Antonio and I were sitting on the back porch, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. His hand rested comfortably over mine on the wooden arm of the swing. The silence between us was easy, filled with an unspoken understanding. "You know," I said, leaning my head on his shoulder, For a long time, I was so angry. Angry at him for the lies, but also angry at myself for not seeing them. I thought those 15 years were a waste. Antonio was quiet for a moment. Then he squeezed my hand. They weren't a waste, Carla, he said softly. They were the years you raised an incredible daughter. They were the years you became the strong, compassionate woman you are today. They were just part of your story, not the end of it. I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that reached my eyes. He was right. The past was no longer a ghost that haunted me. It was simply a part of the landscape I had traveled through to get here. To this moment of quiet joy, I thought about the woman I was 5 years ago. The woman who trembled in a security guard's booth. Her world in ashes. I wished I could go back and tell her that everything would be okay. More than okay. I would tell her that her greatest pain would lead to her greatest strength, that her deepest loneliness would lead to a love more real and profound than she had ever imagined, and that her darkest night was just the prelude to the most beautiful dawn. The truth had cost me a marriage and the life I thought I knew, but in return, it had given me something far more valuable. It had given me back myself, and that was a price I would pay 1,000 times over. My new life wasn't a fairy tale. It was better, it was real, and it was all mine.